Dun, 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 dun. Diddle, 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 dun. Live
We are?
on the streams.
Do we want Laura in the show? I guess she's just available whenever.
Yeah, Laura. Yeah, Laura wants to join us. Hey, Laura, you want to join us on the show?
I need to get rid of Reddit, or I'm not going to pay attention to anything you say.
What do you have up on Reddit right now at this very minute?
It's just I got rid of it, but it was
okay.
a Smite meme. It wasn't even like anything anybody else would care about.
Gotcha.
It's not even something I really care about. I love Smite. Well, I hate love Smite, but like I don't think I've ever looked at a meme and went, "Man, that is funny." Man, that is funny. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
My fucking generation created them, and I still just like, this is fine.
You're like,
yeah, at best. She messaged me, sure, why not, on Facebook. She's not in here currently.
Sure, why not?
You would have to do some reformatting for the stream, but
yeah, that's fine. I mean, I could,
you could just stop being lazy shit and do it.
That and do this and that again. I heard what you said about me. I'm just ignoring it. I'm choosing to ignore it. Here, we're gonna do this. See if she joins us here. There she is.
There she is. Miss Laura there. Oh, Hugo.
Wow. It Hugo'd hard there. Yeah, I did.
You find a new angle every time you're at your parents' house. You find a new angle of the show.
Now I gotta hold on. I gotta figure out how to get us all in here real quick. Because it's gonna take forever now.
I'm watching the stream. This is delightful.
Yeah, it should be. It should be delightful. Look at that. There we go. Look, I'm almost got it.
Okay.
Look at that.
Yeah.
Look at that.
Well, you're kind of there.
Right here, but wait, there's more. I'm gonna actually change.
There's more.
I'm gonna change the words on it even.
Look. Laura.
She's the other Smert GM. 3, 2, 1. Welcome everyone to episode 5 of Level 1 GM. I am your Level 1 GM. You're not Smert GM, Chad. Put your hands down, Michael. Put your hands down. Mike is the Smert GM.
I don't know, but that's true.
Oh my God. But today we have a very special guest, another Smart GM, Laura. Wave to the crowd, hello. Laura. Hello. Over there. So we've been talking a lot. So okay, episode 5, right? That means we've had 4 other episodes to talk about general concepts, things that GMs use all the time. We've talked about pacing. We've talked about NPCs. We've talked about breadcrumbs and creating encounters. So let's put all of that stuff together and start talking about building an actual campaign. And I think that we've touched on the first block inside of that a whole bunch, and that is tent poles. Mike, tell us a little bit, what is a tent pole?
I think for a definition of this, it is a main point or goal in which a narrative needs to hit in order for the overall narrative to make a full conclusion and in the end make sense. It's like plot points in a movie.
Right. That's actually what I was thinking when you said that. If you've ever... I mean, we've all watched movies, and I think we all know when somebody starts talking about plot, that basically...
I've never seen a movie. Movie? Are you talking about Movie? Are you saying that right?
Everybody can relate to a movie, right? So we've got these little pieces inside of it, these points that the characters in the movie need to hit in order to go from beginning, middle to end, right? So, yeah, plot points. In this case, tent poles. We're building the narrative off of these key moments, right? the tent poles that are holding up those key moments of the narrative. So, Mike, tell us how you begin sort of crafting a story, crafting a campaign, and how you approach those tent poles. Do you go in knowing a certain number of tent poles that you have to hit, or are you doing, more of a, hey, I got a beginning, middle, and end. What do I need to fill those points in?
Well, it really depends where you start. Like a lot of different ideas start from a lot of different places. Laura, I'm sure you can agree with me on this. Like sometimes you think about a setting first. Sometimes you think about like a conclusion to a story first. Sometimes you think about a fun start first, and then you just do your best to tie them all together. But that's the point of the tent poles, is to in fact tie it all together, not just make it a loose collection of bullshit, which it feels like anyway. Let's be fair. As soon as the players get involved, as soon as the players get involved, it becomes its own living, breathing thing. But the point is ahead of time, it's entirely for you having these tent poles. You as the GM, the players don't care, don't need them, won't know they're there sometimes, but you need them so that you have goals. It's like a to-do list kind of at the beginning. So finding out where you need to go and when you need to go starts with where you've started and sort of like where your whole concept is. As soon as you have a story in your head, you start with the beginning and then you figure out the end, and then the tent poles are the things you put in the middle so that you can get from point A to point B, or in this case, point A to point triple Z. And for it to make any sense, you still have to do the other letters. You still have to. And that's sort of the point of tent poles. Laura, anything to add?
I would agree. I think also for me, I have only GM'd pre-written campaigns thus far. And one thing, a lot of them are written very differently between at least the two that I have worked with. Strahd is written very much in a way that incorporates those tent poles, but incorporates them as really utilizing that milestone leveling. And I think that I really liked that about the way that module was written. It gave those very key plot points that needed to be hit. It didn't necessarily matter which order they were hit in, but then that also was a cue for me as a GM of like, okay, this is a level up moment. So I didn't feel like I was scrambling or having to really keep track of how long those players had been at a particular level, because I just always knew at the end of this particular moment, that's a level up. That's a moment for them to gain some experience. The next campaign that I'm running does not have that. And it is much more of a linear campaign than Strahd, which was a giant sandbox. So figuring out how to incorporate those for myself, and with this particular upcoming campaign that I plan to run, I'm rewriting a lot of it because a lot of it is boring and dumb and stupid, but I really want it and shitty writing. I'm sorry, Wizards of the Coast, you're great. Please keep writing. Thanks.
Man, no, you're right. Their writers are fucking rough, man. It's tough. Talk to the Magic community about that shit. Jesus.
Yeah, but I knew in my head that I really wanted that last villain, that last monster that's going to be the climax of that entire campaign. I wanted our group to be able to try their hand at it. So I'm like, well, I'm going to run this campaign, but I'm going to change the entire thing and make it something completely different. So I am finally getting some experience figuring out how to put those tent poles in for myself and what order I want it to go, and then how I want it to combine I swear. How I want it to combine with the level management too.
I think that's really genius for Strahd, making the level up points. I love milestone level up way more than XP level up in general anyway. just so you don't have to play
Thank
with
you.
those numbers, and you can just kind of go, okay, it's arbitrary at best, let's be honest, but but you can just kind of, oh, they've done a bunch of stuff, give it to them. But yeah, that's kind of genius for Strahd, the concept of letting your players know, because I previously said generally they don't know when the tent poles are, but they will if you do sort of like milestone. I didn't think about milestone level up system. Milestone level up system kind of can be used to inform them, like, oh, you've done a major thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's I like that quite a bit. Are you trying
Yeah,
to integrate that itself? Because you're
I
doing
am.
Rise of Tiamat, right? Like, or what's
Yeah,
it
I'm
called?
doing the Horde of Dragon Queen.
Horde of Dragon Queen.
Or the Tyranny of Dragons Saga is what it's called. It's 2 campaigns kind of running one right into the other. And I think there's opportunities for milestone leveling in that. The books themselves didn't outline them in the same way that Strahd did. Strahd is very, very clearly written as a milestone level campaign. Like they pretty much say from the very beginning, you can do XP in this if you want to, but it's built to be leveled by milestones. And they give you an entire table of like, these are the locations, this is the level they should be before they go to this
Oh,
location.
wow. Yeah.
These are the spots in the campaign where you should level them up.
I had problems with the way that was written, but that's genius.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the organization of it in and of itself of that campaign was genius. The writing of that campaign was
It was problematic at best.
I think it's really interesting that we've talked about with especially inside of modules. You have this idea of tent poles, more in a sandbox, right? Where it's like you can hit those anytime by a series of by making a series of choices, or you're straight up linear tent poles where it's like they're designed. You got to hit this one, then this one, and then this one.
Mom.
What do you prefer? I mean, as a GM, because that's what we're really talking about here. As a GM, do you like a more open box system where you can place tent poles and if they hit them, they hit them, or would you prefer sort of the linear system?
This goes back the way I'm doing Crosden right now is totally different than the way I'm doing Distant Star right now, because Distant Star is more linear, right? So the tent poles in there they're going to hit them. It's highly unlikely that there's ever a divergence from the story. It's just the way we have it set up, and I think that the players, and Laura can speak to this, are aware that we're pushing them in we're always shoving them in one direction. But having said that, you can create a little bit more tension for your tent poles, and you can have them mean a little bit more. You can have a downswing into some large climax of some sort, such as for a Distant Star. The Goliath games, basically what happened into a party, into there's a meteor that hit the Earth, and now there's a volcano. But Crosden, I think started the way I did it with Crosden is I had it start very linearly, just so you could. There were a couple options at the beginning, but not like a lot. And then because there was a few things that needed to happen. But now that where you guys are at, there's still some stuff that are tentpole things, but the world is developed enough around you, and that I'm aware of the NPCs enough around you that no longer is it just the players that can hit these tent poles. Like I can if the players themselves are just dead set, we're not doing this thing, we're not doing this thing, we're not doing this thing, I can just say, okay, well, it just happens without you, because I know how the rest of the world, the main players outside of you, would react to it. So it no longer has anything to, your influence doesn't matter as much. And I can just present them as, a story they hear about or something they never learn.
So Laura, approaching it as someone who's used modules up to this point, I mean, you're kind of playing with this, rewriting a module in the way that makes a better sense to you. Are you taking a system that was linear, and are you making it a little bit more sandbox and making those tent poles a little more random? Is that what you're doing, and what do you prefer?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a really interesting question, because as a player, I much more prefer sandbox style, where I feel like the players have the agency to make the decisions of where it is that they want to go, as opposed to feeling forced to go in particular directions because we have to. But as a DM or a GM, I much prefer the railroad style because it's so much easier to plan knowing what they're going to do. But I think the way that, at least in my first read through of Horde of the Dragon Queen and Rise of Tiamat, it is much more of a railroad style campaign where something happens which leads to the next thing, which leads to the next thing, and there's not a lot of opportunity for splitting off into various things. So what I want to try and do with it is to try and create opportunities where there are possibilities for smaller sandboxes. So the end goal and the linear line of what they need to do is clear, but there's still some player agency to make the decision to do it.
Right.
So kind of that old, my mom has taught me this multiple times in her like counseling theory of using opportunities and using your language to make it feel like it's their idea when you're the one who's playing the puppet master the whole time. But the wording and the way that the scenes are presented makes it feel like the players have the choice to do that and that they made the choice when really you made the choice for them.
Right.
I've never used that. That's brilliant.
No, never. You've never done that, ever.
I jump in my first big campaign and I'm just, I decide, oh, fuck it. I will just write something and it'll be sandboxy and it'll be great and I'll be fine. And of course, yes, it's hard. Okay.
Yeah.
And I think, and Mike, I think that you have done this, and I hope that what I've done is can accomplish the same things. But I feel like you've built tent poles, multiple tent poles that lead to the same place, as a way to sort of keep that sandbox world all pointed in one direction.
Yeah.
And talk about that a little bit. I mean, how much effort is it at this point in your experience? How much effort is it to keep everything pointed in the same direction?
A lot, especially, and I'm not the only problem. I and the players, I should say, the players aren't the only problem children. I am as well, because I get excited along with the players in the moment, and I'll say like, "Yeah, that sounds fun. Let's go do that." And I'm like, "Well, yeah, except they needed to go the other way, you idiot." Now what do we do? They're in Mexico. What? No. So yeah, and you make those. A good thing to do with that is variable time. Give yourself a long time in game to make things happen. Krosnan's a good example. There's this forthcoming army that is the War King army. That's all these orcs coming from somewhere in the south. You don't know how big the army is. You don't know what the capabilities are. You don't know anything about them. And you were told in 1 month they would invade. Now, in game, when you're playing, 1 day or 1 week could pass, dependent entirely on like what they decide to do. So time can get super wonky, especially to the player's perception of it, and you can make things happen as quickly or slowly as you can. I like to do that. It's happening at this point and tell them ahead of time, especially this War King thing. It's happening at this point.
Right.
So now the players have to go, okay, I know when the tent pole is. I know when this is coming. I know what I'm supposed to do and what I need to do to get there. I've told you all what the goal is. I've told you all where we're going ahead of time. I did the same thing with Adris when he woke up. Here was my plan here's what I did. Here's what the plan of the bad guy is. Now you know exactly where you're going, what exactly you're supposed to do. So it becomes much less on my agency of steering you in the correct direction and more on the player's prerogative to push the story. I basically alleviated the stress off of myself of having to direct you by simply having somebody walk up to you and tell you stuff's bad, storm brewing.
Yep. A classic plot device. I mean, you dropped a ticking clock on us. And it's like, you've got this much time. And that stuff is clicking away. Right? Laura, as you've walked through, especially this new one, as you start to walk through it, do you see some sort of, you get a sense of some classic tent poles, like pieces the things you've seen before and things that, that this makes sense inside of, the world that you play in? And can you talk about those a little bit?
Yeah. I feel like Wizards on the Coast must have a ton of people who play video games as writers, because it's very classic video game feel where you've got mini bosses throughout the entire thing that lead to the main boss, and it's like you have to complete every single one of those mini bosses in order to have the things that you need to complete the final boss. So each one of those little kind of side quests are a very clear tentpole in this campaign. There just happens to be a long section of this campaign that a lot of people end up cutting as I've done my research for it, because it's literally like a 3-month-long caravan across the entire continent. So it's figuring out how to put smaller tentpoles, like stakes. How do you put little stakes into that? How do you make that interesting? And figure out ways to maybe pull that in a different direction, or shorten it, or cut it completely. I don't love the idea of cutting it completely, because I think there are some really, really interesting opportunities for role playing within travel montages. But figuring out how to make it a interesting experience and not like, we're on our 5th session of traveling. What you doing today, folks?
I would agree with you. That's actually, I think I'd be, if I was running it, hard against cutting that. Just because it's difficult to make people do things and experience things while they're just sitting in the back of a wagon. But then that's just on the GM to make it not just sitting in the back of a wagon. It creates a challenge that is so much more interesting than you can. You want an actual training montage? That's what that is. It actually provides a training montage built into the story. It's like, okay, we left this one place, naive, blah, 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 and we come out the other side, men! And you can, like, make it this. Oh, yeah, that would be...
There's an interesting mechanic that I'm kind of playing around with, trying to think of doing that. The group that I play with on Saturdays, the one that we do a podcast, the DM in that has incorporated a different way of doing ability score increases. So usually when you level up at like level 4, 8, and 12, you can select to do an ability score increase. Very rarely do people do that, because you could either do that or a feat, and feats are just way better. But Noel, my DM, he said, I think ability score increases are still important in the world because it's showing your character developing and training, essentially, to be better at something. So he's incorporated this new mechanic where we don't have to wait until levels 4, 8, and 12. Just essentially every time we level up, we make a roll on a particular ability that we're actively trying to increase for our character. And then after a few rolls, we get to level and add a point into that. So we don't have to wait until a particular level. It's done in a different way. And so I've kind of played around with that, especially with that travel sequence in Hoard of the Dragon Queen, because that's something they could actively be working on. And even if they're not leveling up or at the point to take an ability score increase, they could still get that benefit from actively working on it with their character.
I do pull-ups for 3 months.
Right.
Take a strength.
Read some books to become smarter. Yes.
Yeah.
Pop on pop.
So
it makes it more RP.
It's interesting because it's like we're talking about tent poles, we end up doing is talking a lot about what happens in between those tent poles, right? And I think we're from now on we are going to call them tent stakes. That's what we're going to call them. So, tent poles, tent stakes, tent poles.
Well,
tent stakes.
the tent pole is just the plot point, right?
Right.
The important bit is how do you get there?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think the importance of tent poling at the beginning of a campaign, especially when you're writing something, when you're adapting something that somebody else has written or you're writing your own, is knowing where you're going so that you can craft how to get there.
Right.
Not having a direction is just gonna get you lost. It's gonna make your players feel like you don't know where you're going, and you're not gonna feel like you don't know where you're going. We can still see you.
Oh, you're good here.
My internet crashed.
Small
5 seconds. Go ahead. Happy day.
Small caffeine-induced fit on the other side. Don't worry about that.
Muppet arms. So really, I mean, is a tent pole in your mind a big piece of action or a big piece of information?
Either.
Yeah.
It's just it's a change. It's it's the end of a good tent pole is the end of a soap opera when everyone goes. And it can be kind of anything. You know what I mean? A monster can show up out of nowhere. Anytime they say to be continued and it flashes and there's something crazy going on, it could be anything.
A cliffhanger moment of some kind, even if it's in the middle of a session, it's still holy shit, right?
Yeah. It's a moment that makes everyone reevaluate or reaffirm the thoughts they were having. I think. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wait, we're heading the wrong direction. This proves it. Or we were right the whole time. This proves it. I think a good tent pole solidifies that sort of information. Or gives you a large set piece. Could also be that, The mini-boss claim, for instance, are all tent poles, You've been working towards running into MacGuffin holder A so that you can have MacGuffin A. And defeating MacGuffin holder A gives you the thing, and that's a tent pole. You've done it.
Right. Yep.
Something necessary that needs to happen for the end result of the narrative to make sense. I think that's what a tent pole is. And it can be anything therein,
So as you guys both approach sort of those tent pollings, how do you keep track of them? What is the device you use to go? Okay, here's my beginning and my end. That's not at all shocking. That's real. Do you have a process that you use? Do you? I mean, and not to get hard into writing processes because that'll be different from it. But is there a tool that a young, not Smert GM like myself might use to keep track of these tent poles or to help create tent poles that make sense?
Yes, and it's something you've used before, Mr. Chad. Storyboarding.
What?
Something they use in writing of any kind, novels, movies, TV shows. Draw a picture, write out a paragraph. Give yourself a thesis state. Who gives a shit? Just give yourself a note that you will remember and you will recall and you will know what it means, and then give it an order. Here's where it goes.
Right.
That's the point of storyboarding. It's not looking at the full script, writing everything down, giving you every single. This is how we're gonna do all this. This is how we're gonna do all that. That's decided a little later. This is broad strokes. Here's the things that I want to happen in the order I want them to happen in, and I can switch them around if I want, if it makes more sense some other way. But these are the things that need to happen so that I can get from the beginning of the tale to the end of the tale.
Laura?
Really similar. I'll just say it straight out. I'm probably more anal retentive than Mike.
I can't believe that that's true.
What? I keep a Google Drive folder for every campaign I do, and I have and it's my similar process to when I'm writing.
7
book-
terabytes.
They're huge. It's dumb. It's stupid, and there's got to be a more succinct way to do it. But it's the way that I write too. I've got a folder and I've got a document all about the characters, and I have a page for each NPC. I have a page for each character, each player character, and the information I know about them, and then ideas that I have for how to incorporate them directly into the plot. I have pages for key plot points and what needs to happen before that plot point triggers and what happens after it triggers. It's a lot. And basically I could just read the campaign guide and do it that way and have all the same information typed in front of me instead of retyping it. But that's how my brain works. Yeah, I have many files of Google Docs that are just completely unnecessary. And then as I DM, I find out that as I try and run off of those Google Docs, y'all just end up fucking off and doing something weird anyway. I have to make up a Dracolich just hanging out in a building that you were into because I felt like you needed to fight something.
I feel like that's a good note. Don't get too attached to this stuff as a GM. Kind of any of it. Not just your tent poles, not just your main narrative, not just your NPCs or whatever the hell you're doing. Don't get too attached to anything. That's kind of the point of the game. It's all a little improv,
Right.
And things need to change on the fly.
Right. Because essentially what we're doing is live performance, right? So
even if it's just for the people in the room.
Yeah. Even even if whatever it is, however we prepare, right? Even as GMs, we're essentially just preparing for a live performance. And as we all know, even in scripted content on live performance, sometimes things go awry. And you kind of have to know what's coming next. So again, it all kind of comes back down to preparation. And whatever the tools you use to be more prepared to enter that improvisational performance experience, the better off that you are. Let's break it down a little bit, and each of you, I want 3 important things to remember as you begin developing tent poles for your campaign. Number 1, Mike, go.
One thing to remember when developing tent poles. Well, know where you started, know where you end. There's no point in a tent pole because the point of the tent pole is you're steering the vehicle. If you don't know your destination, what's the point in steering at all?
Laura, give me your first.
Probably. I mean, I definitely agree with Mike, and that is probably my first as well, but I want to try and vary things.
Yeah, because we're going to end up with 6. It's going to be awesome.
Know your characters and know your characters' motivations. If you're trying to build a tent pole that is something that your characters would never, ever do, it's never going to get done.
Right.
So
good point.
Have a basic understanding of your characters, why they're there, and what their motivations are before you build a tent pole for them.
That's an excellent point.
Nice.
You want to do your third? You want to do your second? So
number
that you
2,
get,
go.
Back to back one.
Yeah, do it. Do it. Number 2.
We're doing snake draft. It goes back and forth.
Yeah. Number 2, if the tent pole that you're building is a combat related encounter, make it realistic. Don't put a level 20 villain in your second 10 pole, unless the plan is to scare the living shit out of your party and potentially kill someone.
Which, according to Michael, is a legitimate use of.
Sometimes you got to smack a group. I don't know how else to say it.
Unless there's a very, very good reason for it, be realistic about the level of encounter that you're planning for that temple.
Michael, number 2.
Number 2 for me would be if you feel the need to, if you find yourself in an open world setting and you feel the need to telegraph your tent poles, don't be afraid to do so. Tell your in character, or however you would like to do it, tell your players ahead of time, there's a thing coming, there's this thing over there, there's this thing on the horizon that you need to be wary of and you need to look out for it, and we all need to plan for it. Tell them. There's no reason not to. That way they're in on the game the same as you.
Nice. All right, Mike, number 3.
Number 3, don't be too precious about any of it. I understand a lot of people get super, this is my story and I'm going to tell it, even if it's a module or whatever. Don't get too precious about it. If it's not going to happen, it's not going to happen. Figure out another way to get there. The point of a storyboard is to have a good idea, not in concrete, this is what we're doing.
Right. If you're unwilling to kill those things off, write a book.
Yeah.
No role play. Laura, number 3.
Sort of 2 in 1. Build your tent poles out of rubber and not brick.
Nice.
Because they inevitably will change. And bury your tent poles in sand, not concrete, because their location will likely change too.
Nice.
So overall flexibility with your tent poles.
Nice.
Don't marry them. They're an inanimate object.
I will say, as a contractor, just don't do those things. But yeah, tent poling for a narrative circumstance. Yeah, that makes sense.
Nice. So yes, tent poles, little, they're those little beacons that help us as storytellers guide the rest of the story. We want those to get us from the beginning to the end. But as you guys have said, they're gonna be everywhere and anywhere. Don't give yourselves opportunities telling that story for for different tempos to lead to the same place. Just be flexible, be ready, know your story. All comes back to that stuff. Jesus Christ.
At least once a month GMing inside my head as you guys start doing stuff. There's just a fire brigade screaming, "Why do we have more fire and not water?"
Yes, indeed. Thanks for watching, everybody. Mike, tell them where they can find us.
They can find us right here on twitch.tv/Durnk Industries on Tuesday afternoons for this show. Wednesday evenings, Thursday evenings, and Sunday evenings, all role-playing nights. And you can also find us at on youtube.com, Durnk Industries.
Yep, you can catch up on all the stories that we talk about here. And if you want to hang out with us on Discord, you have to come to Twitch and watch us live. So hopefully we'll see you on one of those evenings or back during one of these broadcasts. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your life. It's 2020. We just don't know how long that's going to be.
We're not making another show.
We don't know.
You just
We don't know.
Channel?
It could things
canceled the whole channel.
Things could explode tomorrow. We just have no idea. So
Beirut did. That's
just
bad.
hug someone next to you every day. You can tell where my brain's at.
What is this? Stop.
I don't know. I'm
Stop
fine.
the show.
We're stopping the show. We're stopping
What are you doing?
What?